right now, I work for Pillsbury United Communities, and I'm the director of an institution called the Urban Institute for Service and Learning. And so, where I am right now is, I think, a culmination of the work that I've been doing for a number of years. A lot of my work has really been around startup organizations, turnaround organizations, working boards, transitioning to full-time staff, things of that nature. So I have a lot of experience in organizational development, launching programs, but then I also have a lot of experience with leadership development programs themselves. I've partaken in a fair amount of leadership development programs. I understand a lot about cohort models, and so that's just been kind of a natural transition to my work at the Urban Institute. I worked at Pillsbury a few years ago, left for a little bit, and went to graduate school, got a master's in public administration from Baruch College through the National Urban Fellows Program in New York, and then returned to Pillsbury to launch Public Allies Twin Cities. So Public Allies is a national network in about 21 different cities now, and the goal of Public Allies is to kind of change the face and practice of nonprofit leadership. And so we launched our site here 3 years ago, and every 10 months we bring in and train about 25 diverse young leaders. We place them in different nonprofit organizations and do some type of capacity building project at the same time that they get mentoring and coaching. We also do a lot of training around kind of values-based leadership, nonprofit mechanics, so that way when they leave the program, they're able to go into kind of a mid-managerial level position. So that is one of the key programs that I work on now. I have kind of a background in community organizing. I worked in the LGBT community for a long time. I have a fair amount of experience in public health. So in those different, I guess, kind of nodes, they've all really kind of come together into a bigger roll-up of kind of healthy and successful communities. A healthy and successful community has, good health outcomes. They have good access to education, access to quality jobs and economic opportunity, and at the same time feel a fair amount of connection with one another. Your neighbors, you help one another out. So I think that those are the big goals that I really strive to accomplish with my work.
So when you were growing up, you were thinking, when I grow up, what I want to do is get into organizational development in the nonprofit sector?
No, not quite like that. I think that it's a natural flow from what my beginning stages of life look like, but I don't know if I said I want to do organizational development when I get older. My family was really big in, I don't know if I would say volunteering. They didn't really call it volunteering. We were, pushed into a lot of different activities. I was in the Boy Scouts for a long time when I grew up, so that has this natural kind of service community element to it. My family was big in our religious community, volunteered a lot at church, breakfasts, things of that nature. My dad was really big in fundraisers. If there was individuals who either were suffering from cancer or had different family needs, a lot of pancake breakfast fundraisers was kind of big for us. And so there was always this expectation that you need to kind of help out other people, and it's not just about yourself. And so I think those early lessons really carried me through. And then as I got older, then my mental framework started becoming more geared towards social justice issues, and really kind of seeing the inequities that were out there in ways that I wasn't fully comfortable with how the world was structured. And so rather than, I think, just resting in my dissatisfaction, I think that there's a tendency to say, what can I do with that? And so I let that question kind of carry me on, for a while. And, when I went to the University of Minnesota for my undergraduate experience, the coursework that I did over there was really in line with kind of making the world a better place, I guess. I majored in international relations and global studies and have a focus on governance, peace, and justice. And so, just naturally coming across a lot of those professors and ideologies kind of kept me on that path. And so I had a lot of community organizer friends, friends that were trying to, protest a lot. And that's really important. And I think that, kind of mass protests and things like that, are critical, but I think that those are really just one piece. And, you have to see them as a part of a larger strategy. And so being able to, educate myself around how do organizations function, what are their positions in different communities, how do they influence legislation, politicians, what does it look like for media affairs? I wanted to be able to understand all these different pieces because that's where I think change happens. It's not just the protest, because there's a lot of front end work that goes into that, and then a lot of follow-up work on the back end. And so I really wanted to be able to understand more comprehensively how change happens. I mean, I think right now the personal interactions I have with folks that keep me in it is an authenticity to the relationship. And, as in the position that I currently hold, I'm a mentor and a coach. And so that mentoring and coaching relationship is, I think, the most rewarding piece, because certainly I have to think about, what do federal guidelines say about this AmeriCorps program, or are we making sure that XYZ piece is getting done? But that's really, I think, at the foundation. And the things that really, I think, keep me going are those relationships with the individuals that go through our program. So hearing throughout the process, you've really helped me with, talking to my supervisor in a much more productive way. Or you've helped me see why education and post-secondary education is important, and I'm going to go and apply for college when I'm done with this program. Or just, a shift in attitude or worldview, I think, is one of the biggest pieces. If somebody comes into the program and maybe they don't know a lot about, diversity and inclusivity and equity issues, and going through our program at the end, that, you see this light bulb turn on, and they're like, oh, now that I see things like that, I couldn't ever imagine going back to that sort of mindset and mentality where I put people in little boxes and we're all separate, and maybe there's some sort of prejudices that I bring along to that. When people's worldview opens, I think that's one of the best pieces of that.
I'm doing that.
Fine, absolutely fine.
So, so you work with an organization that has got its hands in a lot of different things. Do you find that the things that you're personally passionate about, that you can align that with your work most of the time, or do you do other ways that you can demonstrate, like leadership or organize with other folks outside the context of that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I work for an organization like Pillsbury United Communities, which is fairly unique in, I think, its operating philosophies, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of freedom. If you have a good idea, you're really encouraged to run with it. And I think that's why, Pillsbury's been around for so long, is because it prides itself, I think, on being nimble and changing course and being responsive to communities and listening to staff folks. Certainly I have my, job description, and here's what you have to do in the parameters. But if you want to go above and beyond that, you certainly have that ability to do it. And so a lot of my own, personal growth and leadership development has been through my position at Pillsbury. But, kind of in addition to that, I do some other things, sit on a couple of other boards, lend myself for, informational interviews or kind of individual mentoring sessions with individuals that might ask for that. I sit on the board of Youth Prize right now, which is an organization focused on youth voice and out of school time, and this idea that learning is not just about what happens in the classroom, but it's about all these other things that are, out of school time. If you're, in extracurricular activities, or you're volunteering, or you're involved in a religious community, those are all things that also contribute to your learning. And so having those sorts of quality experiences lend themselves to higher academic levels, academic attainment in the classroom. So I do some of those other things as well, but really within my job at Pillsbury, there's a lot of flexibility and creativity that we can have. Yeah, I mean, I think the benefit in terms of a perspective on leadership is with this Public Allies program. So Paul Schmitz, who is the national CEO of Public Allies, he has a book and it's called Everyone Leads. And so the idea is that leadership is an action that many can take, not a position that few hold. If you even look at, I think about John Maxwell. John Maxwell is an author who really focuses a lot on leadership, has a number of books out. He has this kind of 5-tiered leadership level. And so at the bottom level, that's really positional authority. You are my staff person. You respond and follow my direction because that is your job and duty to do. At the top of the level, the 5th level, that's individuals that people are coming along with you because they believe in who you are, they believe in your vision, the things that you were saying. Those are individuals like, civil rights leaders. Those are people that have a fair amount of people following them, but not because they have any sort of position, and they might not have a position. And so the idea is that as you kind of become more comfortable and authentic in your own leadership, you've gained a clarity in your purpose and your drive, that's when people follow you more. And so, I want to be able to keep kind of driving up that 5-tier ladder that, John Maxwell talks about. But I think, in conveying that to other people, there's a number of ways that people can demonstrate leadership. A lot of times it happens within their families. If they're, an individual who, works and maybe a couple of their other family members don't work, that would be leadership. Or even just being able to have a genuine and authentic conversation with somebody where you are kind of hearing somebody fully. I see that a lot with people. Even that listening ability is a leadership quality in and of itself. And so, encouraging people to kind of open their mind and see the different possibilities that exist. Because I think so many times we get so narrowly focused on, this is the leadership track, or this is the educational path you should take. Even with an educational path, I think the conversation is starting to shift away from you have to get a 4-year degree, then you have to get a master's degree. And those things are important, but that's not the path for everybody. And, individuals should be able to feel fulfilled and satisfied without having to put themselves on a path that might not quite be for them. I think about individuals in my own family. Not everybody in my family, cousins, brothers and sisters, things of that nature, aren't going to go to a 4-year college. But, they'll go to a 2-year college, or they'll get a specific skill or trade, and then that allows them to either open a barbershop or, work in a mechanic's garage, and be able to kind of build a small business as a mechanic. There's all these different paths, and so we really encourage people to think broadly and creatively about how they demonstrate that. I think the piece about being authentic and having trust is it comes when you interact with somebody and they feel like they are really interacting with you and not a persona. So if I feel like I'm speaking with you and the conversation that we're having is the same sort of conversation that we would have if we're sitting in your living room, that's, I think, when people feel authentic and they're able to trust you. If they feel like, they're talking to you as you are Dr. So-and-so and I'm talking to you through this lens, it's going to be harder to have higher levels of trust. One of the things that we do is we have a lot of our programs structured around cohort models, and in cohort models there's trust that is really important to it. Support structures, also holding people accountable, goes into that trust development. But being able to see people for people that are similar to you, I think, is really important for that. In some of our programs, we have people that, have master's degrees on one end of the spectrum, and we have people that barely got a GED. And all of those folks come in at the same level. And we expect, those with the GEDs and those with the master's degrees to be able to have a dialogue that is equitable in nature, where you know just as much about this person as they know about you. And I think it's, coming to any sort of a relationship with that level playing field idea. One of the other one of my favorite kind of public allies lessons that Paul Schmitz talks about is, he talks about this glass, right? So we have this glass, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? He asks this question, and the answer is yes. It is half full and it is half empty. And so as community members and people who are, say, doing service delivery or people who are identified as a community organizers, you should see yourself and the community member or the client or whatever terminology you use as being half full and half empty just as you are, and your jobs are to fill one another up, not the service provider or the community organizer pouring water into somebody else's empty glass. And so I think if you were to approach it that way, that becomes very obvious to people, and there's automatically a barrier that gets put into it. So I think, it really comes down to how you as a leader or a community organizer or service provider show up in the room, and the things about your own self or your own privilege that you check and fully recognize. So I'm, angry about many different, social injustices, things that happen. But the thing that I'm most upset about is more at a systemic level, is that in America, we've created this very complex system. And my idea is that systems should respond to human needs, not the other way. And we've created this system where we expect individuals to tailor themselves to the system versus figuring out how our systems really work for us. And so you can look at that in a number of different dimensions. You can think about it from, kind of a prison industrial complex perspective. The way that the legal system is structured is not responsive to individuals. It's designed to capture certain demographics and individuals, put them into institutions, remove them from communities, and that's just kind of the way that the system is. If I think about it from a nonprofit sector perspective, a lot of us in the nonprofit sector have become seduced by this idea that we should be more focused on outcomes, results. The conversation now is we are spending all of this money in the social service and nonprofit sector, and where the needle's moving. So foundations are becoming more outcome focused. They want to focus on results. A lot of this pay for performance conversation, as long as you achieve this result, then you'll get paid, but if you don't, you're not going to get paid. And, for me, that's a false conversation. If you remove kind of the nonprofit sector and you silo it and just look at it as one thing, it's not siloed. The social service sector exists in the context of, corporations, this business-minded environment, politics, how laws are structured. And it's really those three things. It's a social service sector, for-profit sector, and, laws, politics that really kind of create the operating environment we are. So in focusing too much on what the nonprofit sector is not doing, I think what's happening is we're letting the corporate world and the legal system off the hook. It's like the metaphor about, there's folks standing on the bank of a river, there's babies coming down the river, you go and try to pull the babies out. You do that, but then you see that there's more babies coming down the river. You're trying to, get babies out more quickly. Well, on the back end, upriver, there's people that are continuing to throw babies in the river. And so we're focusing on right now how quickly we're pulling babies out of the river, at the same time that we're not focusing on how laws are structured and how corporations do business that are throwing the babies in the river in the first place. And so I think that that's an anger that I have right now, is that we're very distracted, and I think foundation leaders are lending themselves to that. I think executive directors of large institutions are giving into that and seeing that as truth. And I think that we really should move away from that conversation. I think what I'm pleased about is a difference in, I think, attitude and an openness of a younger generation. Certainly there's going to still be individuals that are fairly self-centered, are still into the kind of popular culture, consumerism, lifestyle. But I think as a whole, I think if you look not just in America, but globally, what young people, what millennials are starting to do is, I think more and more people are identifying themselves as global citizens. I think that, as young people have been traveling more, over the last couple of decades, I think with the increase in connectivity that exists, with social media, moving from a passive reception of content and media to young people being the creators and drivers of their own media. I think that's really shifting what is happening, and my hope is that dynamic will continue, and that as this younger generation continues to get older and move into positions of power and take over institutions, that will continue that perspective. And I think that if that perspective is continued, that's where we're going to see some sort of tipping point where there's some very dramatic changes in systems. I don't think it's not in a 5 to 10 year thing, but I could definitely see 15 to 20 years where we take on some very, very big challenges, where we're doing big ticket items like abolishing for-profit prisons, or we're really able to reform education in a very significant way, or we're able to partner with democracies around the globe in a much more authentic and comprehensive way to achieve higher levels of safety, reduction of terrorism, reduction of global poverty. And then, one other piece around population. I think that eventually we're going to get to this very real conversation around what our population looks like combined with our levels of consumerism. And I think that that's going to be a very interesting conversation that I think people are starting to become more ready for. I think that we have this contradictory culture. If we're just speaking about Minnesota, we have this idea that we're so progressive, that we have these great innovative ideas. As you said, we have all these programs that are focused on closing the achievement gap, and yet it keeps getting wider. And we're very near the bottom in the rest of the country in terms of the achievement gap. And I think that there's a disingenuousness that comes along with the way that some folks approach education reform. Oftentimes, I think it comes from what I was saying before about the glass half full, glass half empty. They look at community as just inherently half empty. And so I think that's one of the key pieces. If you look at a community or a group of people through a deficiency-based lens, that's the expectation that's going to play out. And so if you look at a community or certain demographics in that way, then your systemic approaches are going to be modeled through that lens. And so I think that there's a certain way that parents specifically feel like they're not represented, even in terms of in-classroom representation. There's not a whole lot of teachers of color for students of color to look up to. I hear that a lot, especially from, kind of that early teenage set. Younger kids don't quite have that focus. But when you talk to 13, 14, 15-year-olds, I hear from them, we want to see faces in our classroom that look like us. The one day we had an individual at a community event, and they were talking about, I think, history classes. And, he said, the only thing I learn about my people or my race is about slavery and how to hate myself. And so this is the curriculum challenge that I think we have, and part of it goes to not having enough teachers of color in the classroom. It's not having enough administrators that are from the communities that they're serving. Certainly, there's I think some systemic issues. However you feel about unions, pro or con, there is an effect that teacher seniority has in terms of who gets to stay in the classroom and who doesn't. If you operate from a last in, first out standpoint, generally how it's structured is teachers of color are younger and they're coming in. So if they're coming in, they're going to be the first ones out. So they're not even getting very deep into the pool. And so you maintain that, more homogenous demography to your teaching staff. And then I think it's just kind of the nature of how economics are structured in Minnesota. If you have a significant gap in unemployment rates between, Black and Latino communities and white communities, economics have a direct effect on educational attainment of the children of those families. And so I see them as really tied together, and it'll be difficult to raise one without the other. And I think more of the employment piece, I think, is kind of based in this very nuanced, hidden form of racism that we have in Minnesota. Even though we see ourselves as fairly progressive, there's not a lot of, I think, intermingling other than, kind of in the city, if we're here, certainly we're here in Cedar Riverside. But if you go to the suburbs, if you go to outstate, everybody's fairly homogenous in who they, surround themselves with. And so I think that really carries over into the corporate world, the for-profit, even small mom and pop shops. It's going to be more likely that people are going to hire people that look just like them. So if that's occurring in the employment world, that's going to have an effect on how children are learning. Many of my heroes have been kind of closer mentors. I mean, I certainly have some heroes that are kind of out there, big names, authors, things of that nature. But, certainly my current boss, Shonda Smith Baker, has been somebody that has, invested a lot of personal time in my growth and professional development in a fairly authentic way. There's another gentleman named Jaime Martinez who works for Clearway, Minnesota. He does community development and organizing. And, really, I think for me, taught me the biggest lesson that every day is an opportunity. That is one of his big things that he says. And, it's very true. I think oftentimes we can get bogged down into what our life situation looks like, what is going on over a period of time. But really, working with him allowed me to see each day for an individual day. Every day you wake up, you can do something very different with that day. You might have had a terrible day the previous day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're destined to have a terrible day in this day as well. I have one staff person who he talks about. I think there's 86,400 seconds in a day. Does that sound about right? And so he does this thing of everybody gets the same 86,400 seconds in a day. You might spend 20,000 of those seconds in a productive way, and then you waste the rest of it. So this idea that we all get the same amount of time, and it's really based on how you manage that time and what you do with it. I think if I think about, higher level individuals, as I was growing up, I read a lot of books from, kind of the greats, like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., John Maxwell, like I mentioned. John Shelby Spong was actually an interesting read as I was growing up. He wrote a lot about kind of a changing dynamic in Christianity and how, Christianity needs to, he had a book called Christianity Must Change or Die. And so this idea that you need to move away from dogma, rigid structures, and get more to kind of the spirit and essence of things. And that, I think, really goes even beyond Christianity or religious pieces. I think about, what that means for the legal system and how we look at laws. People think that, it's just about this legal structure, but I think if you follow that train too far, you get very off track, because then you get to kind of the letter of the law, how things are actually working, and you have to have fidelity to this, versus looking back at the original spirit of the law and saying, well, what was the real purpose for this? And is it having the effects that we intended for this to have? And if it's not having those effects, then you need to revisit that, and then you need to change it. And we're not able to do that right now because our political system works so slowly, and it's designed in a way to create really firmly rooted dichotomization. It makes me think about how corporate competitors function. So if you have two main competitors, so you can think about like a Walmart or a Target or Burger King and a McDonald's, what happens, if this is an MBA lesson too, if you have these two key competitors, they're naturally going to gravitate towards creating the same product. That's why McDonald's and Burger King are not that different. You essentially move towards one another so they offer the same thing, but you have to make a choice of which one you want. And I think that it happens with the political system. Democrats and Republicans really don't look that much different, but we're so convinced that we're so vastly different that we can't agree on anything and we can't come to any sort of compromise. And so I think we need to get back to what that spirit of those laws or the legal system or what our humanity is, to be able to kind of break out of that. One of the things that I think about in my own kind of staffing and that I tell people a lot is my job is to hire people smarter than I am. And my job is to hire people that don't look anything like me. Because if I hire somebody that looks just like me, they think just like me, there's not really much of a purpose for them to be there because I already have that perspective. So I don't need another person with that perspective. I need other perspectives in the room. I don't think I've ever really shied away from being a little bit uncomfortable and going into rooms where I felt a little bit out of place. I wasn't at the education level that everybody else was, just to be able to kind of be around that and, kind of absorb it, and be a sponge. And I think in terms of being a coach and a mentor, when you're working with individuals, you should always be prepared for them to teach you something. I think that that's really the only genuine way to go about it, because you all have different life experiences. I have some things that I know that could be of benefit to you, and I'll share that with you, but generally how that comes out is by me asking you questions, asking you what you think about it. So my knowledge really comes out through asking you questions in particular ways. And the ways that folks answer that question, more comes out about their life experience, how they perceive the world, how they interact with different life situations, what does their response look like. And so in them giving those answers, there's a natural learning, I think, that occurs in that. Just being able to hear people's life experiences, who, just to kind of use kind of a service provider client mentality for a second. If you have somebody who, grew up in a fairly disadvantaged life situation, and, they've kind of grown into, somebody who has put themselves through college or done some of those other things, being able to hear how their life has gone and to really kind of see that arc in their life experience is invaluable and just allows you to be able to see how different and similar people are. And so whatever I give to individuals, generally, and I honestly think this, as much as I give, I get much more back from people. I think the idea is, and I get this question a lot, especially with the work that we do at Pillsbury. Some of what we do is we do fiscal agency, fiscal sponsor relationships for people that do want to start nonprofits. So I have this conversation frequently. And, I kind of always, do this, first George Bush thing when he was like, no new taxes. I'm a very no new nonprofits kind of person, unless there's really a genuine need. And that is the correct direction to go. But otherwise, what I really encourage folks to do is look to existing organizations, other programs that you might be able to attach to. If you have some resources at your disposal, can you bring resources to that? And I think where things are going, just in terms of kind of drying up resources, right now and for the foreseeable future, it's really about partnerships and network. Because I think we're realizing that we're so interdependent and we've created this very complex system that things don't really happen in silos, even if we fool ourselves to look at them in a silo. And so being able to network with other organizations and programs I think is always the first place to start, even if that's just an exploration process and ultimately you do want to start a new nonprofit, you should really start exploring first and looking at to what partnerships and networking opportunities are already there. Because chances are, if you have an idea, 100 other people have already had the same idea, and 20 of them have started a nonprofit with that same idea. That's a good question. I'm not sure. What I do know is that that's going to have to be very important going into the future because, like I was saying now, in my greatest hope of being kind of the worldview that the millennial generation has and what it might do as it carries that forward in their own jobs as they get older and take over organizations and budgets and decision-making abilities. I think we're going to have some sort of intergenerational connection. For a couple reasons. One, which is a little bit more on the negative side, and that's that I think the older generation that is holding on to power now and in positions of authority probably shouldn't be there anymore because I think it's becoming obvious to people that the system that we've created is not sustainable, and we still have these long existing problems societally that are not going away. And we haven't had any creative solutions to those for a long time. And so I think we need to start looking at what does that look like if we do something generationally that we've never done before. So the trajectory of human life is that you respect your elders, they've paid their dues, they've worked their way up, they're going to be the decision makers. But what we're finding, I think, and this might be more specific to, America, if I think about things like Social Security, retirement, Medicare, Medicaid, older generations want things to look like how they intended them to look like, and they don't really want to let go. And I think what's happening with that is that's part of what's creating this really heavily rooted dichotomization in the political realm. I think that if I look at like a John Boehner and like a Harry Reid, two individuals on opposite sides of the aisle have the exact same problem. And they're not willing to compromise, and they're not willing to come to some sort of common ground on things. And so I would be interested to see if there's a way for there to be a managed transition where significant decision-making authority doesn't rest with the older generation anymore solely, but that it's being brought down to a younger generation, and that folks in the older generation are still kept in certain positions for advisement to be able to provide historical perspective, because it's not that folks in the older generation aren't useful or valuable, because they're very useful or valuable, but I think we need to do something different with who is actually able to make decisions, because the older generation is going to make decisions for them right now, and everybody that's going to come along behind them is going to have to wait. And I think the problems that we have right now can't wait. I mean, we have this population issue, we have this national deficit budget issue, we have this systemic education and racism issue, and we need new ideas and we need new blood. And unless younger folks are able to take over some of those tables, I mean, we don't have 30 or 40 years to wait to start this. Like, we need to start yesterday.